Yep.
Welcome to the NAO show, boys and girls. No, that is not Tank Top Mike. That is Evan, and we do have Marky Mark on the show as well. To this week, we are going to go with 5 teams. We're going to go worst case scenario leading into the 2022 league, and we're going to find out what is worst case scenario for some of these teams. And some of these teams, it might be winning. Winning might be the worst case scenario. So, welcome to the show, Evan. How you doing? Is your eye okay? Are you seeing all right?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I keep having that like itch my eye or something. I don't know what's going on. It's probably all the allergies from the bull crap I was hearing before the show.
All right. So you're talking to Ian again.
This slander, this Rashad White slander just permeates this atmosphere. I do not know what is wrong with you, but it's okay. You will be enlightened soon enough.
Well, I win regardless. So let's just say that I'll right off the top, I win regardless. That is going to be the rolling occurrence throughout this whole show is that the Prince, he's going to win. There is no bad case scenario. Everything is going to come up daisies for me.
I seem to remember another running back that I cannot claim to have been.
All right, Mark, let's go ahead and jump on this show.
I feel like that guy did pretty well, and he was probably bashed a few years ago too. But anyways, I digress.
Well, yeah, normally we'd come to me to give the rundown of the show, but I think we're going to throw that to Evan because he had this idea. So tell us what we're doing exactly, specifically. Yeah. So explain it because Shawn, sometimes leaves things out.
So, we talked about this. We spent a lot of time, hours and hours, really just minutes of coming up with this idea. So if it falls on its face, it's definitely my fault because I'm the one that threw it at the guys. So the idea is, what are some things that are worst case scenarios team by team? We're going to do 5 teams on tonight's show. And just as a preface, we're going to leave out injuries because obviously injuries are almost everybody's worst case scenario and injuries do happen. So we're going to talk team by team specific, and kind of like Shawn mentioned, some teams' worst case scenario for this season is winning because they're not really trying to win. So just looking at those things, it's going to be interesting to see what we come up with for each team. And I'm excited you guys were all right with the idea. I think it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah. So the order we're going to go in is we're looking at the waiver order here. So in no particular order, except for the waiver 1 through 5, we're going to do those first 5 teams. So that means we're going to start with Tank Top Mike. So let's all open up Tank Top Mike's roster and let's say what is the worst case scenario for Tank Top Mike this year. Shawn, you want to start off, man?
Got it. All right, let's go. All right. So obviously there is some legal issues that are happening with one of his players, but I won't go into that one. I think a worst case scenario is that DJ Moore's quarterback doesn't really step up and do much. DJ Moore has done really well with crappy quarterbacks regardless, but how much longer can this guy carry himself through fantasy football? And I also think the depth at some positions is kind of lacking. So I don't know. I think worst case scenario is that Mike is undefeated when it gets into bye weeks, and then he loses some close ones. Maybe I think that'd probably be worst case scenario, but I still see him probably in the top 4.
Well, you started off with DJ Moore. Evan, what are your thoughts on DJ Moore? You think, Baker's there now. They got the whole quarterback competition. I think Darnold started off with the 1s and Mayfield with the 2s. So I think Matt Rule is kind of an idiot. But what do you think about DJ Moore with the thought of Baker Mayfield being the quarterback? Is that going to be the guy that gets him over the top? Is it the quarterback or is it DJ Moore? What do you think, man?
So I think it's neither. I think it's the offensive coordinator. I think it's McAdoo. Can DJ Moore, can they be more creative with him and find ways to get him in the end zone more than 4 times? Because he's had 4 touchdowns each of the last 3 years running. If he finishes with more than 4 touchdowns, he's probably going to be a borderline wide receiver 1 or at least a high end wide receiver 2. I think that's the question there. And I think he could hit that. Now I'm a little biased, right? I've made a trade for him in another league. I like the Baker landing. I think if anything, Baker's more consistent and has shown that he's not afraid to let it rip deep. I think one of the biggest struggles with Darnold is you saw him early when things were hitting. He was smooth. When he faces adversity, he tends to hold the ball longer.
Right,
That's just my observation for him. So I'm Baker. It don't matter if he just threw a pick. He's going to go right back out there. Has a little bit of that Brett Favre mentality. Wish he had Brett Favre's skill set. But he's going to let it rip. I do just kind of while I'm talking here, I want to touch on another player that I think is probably a worst case scenario. And when I look at some of these, I'm going to look at what have they invested in that player, because your biggest investment is what you don't want to go south, right? And for Mark, I think Stephon Diggs is that question. So I'm not saying I believe this, but I think worst case scenario for Mike this year is the Gabriel Davis hype is more than true. And he becomes the Buffalo Bills wide receiver 1 this season. Because if that happens, right, and this is something that's talked about, that is a worst case scenario for Mike, because now a player that he has built his team around and he traded us 2 firsts, a second, and Jacoby Myers. First and 22 and 23. You give up 2 firsts, a second, and a player for one person. You don't need that player to lose any value. And if he loses any value, now he's 29 years old and was a team's wide receiver 2. I'm blurring out what's going on. I think his worst case scenario is his top 2 receivers take a step back by the wide receiver 2s on their team this year. Allen Robinson is getting a lot of hype in Rams country, and Davis is getting a lot of hype in Bills country. Again, I'm not saying I believe these things are going to happen, but these are the storylines around these players. And if Kupp and Diggs aren't those guys, if they're both not wide receiver 1s this season, that's really going to hurt not only Mike this year, but in years to come, because he needs those guys not to just be good this year. He needs them to be good by how his roster is constructed for the at least next pair of years.
Yeah, and you mentioned the age, and Kupp and Diggs both are up there for dynasty, and Diggs, I don't worry so much about Davis taking over. I think Davis will be a good number 2 there. I think Diggs will be fine, but you talk about Kupp, and Shawn mentioned Eckler a little bit earlier. Those are 2 guys that when we talk about regression to the mean, these are 2 guys that had, awesome seasons, probably, the seasons of their life, and you kind of have to look at Eckler with 20 touchdowns. Regression to the mean means that he's going to be scoring less touchdowns. And what is he, 29 himself, or he's up there too? Nah, he's not 29, but
27.
27.
He's 32 in running back years.
Yeah, 27. He's up there. Kupp too. I mean,
Kupp's
season.
Yep.
Yeah, 29 and had a great season. So yeah, any regression to the mean for those guys means that they're going to drop off a little bit. So what's the drop off? Is it too much to consistently score well and have good weeks with these guys, or is it still like a good output, a good wide receiver 1s, running back 1s kind of numbers?
Well, I mean, even if Eckler and Kupp both have significant drop-offs, they're still going to be RB1s and wide receiver 1s. So, I mean, he's just going to need somebody else like a DJ Moore, a Pittman, to make up the difference that they're not going to get. I think Kupp is going to have a significant drop-off, but still be in the top 5 wide receivers, because, I mean, he had crazy numbers last year. And for him to do that again would be just mind-boggling.
Trends are a thing, right? I'll kind of go outside of football for a minute. I remember, I don't know if any of you guys are UFC guys, but Rose Namajunas was fighting a few weeks ago for the title. And I remember they popped up her record, and she had never won a fourth match in a row. She wins 3 matches and loses a fight, 3 matches, loses a fight. Cooper Kupp, if we look at Cooper Kupp, has never had a season the following year that is even close to what he did the previous year when he's had decent years. So rookie year, he's wide receiver 25, the next year 46. Then he has that wide receiver 1 year where he's a wide receiver 5. The next year he's in a wide receiver 3, he's in the wide receiver 20s to 34, depending on standard or PPR. This year he's wide receiver 1. The trend would be he's going to drop at least 20 spots. Does that happen? I don't know, but I'm also old enough to remember when people were only drafting Matt Ryan every other year because that was a thing. He was a wide receiver or a quarterback 1 every other year, and every other year he sucked. So
I remember asking Mike one time, "Hey, what year are we on for Ryan? Because I'm looking at him in another league, you know."
Yeah. So trends are a thing. Can he repeat? And wide receiver is that position where guys do repeat more often than not, but I don't know. Maybe it's a body thing. Maybe Kupp's body has just, to this point, never allowed him to run that hot 2 seasons in a row. It's at least a question and a worst case scenario.
I think something we got to take into consideration is the quarterback in Rams country. Stafford is a significant uptick from everybody that's ever thrown him the ball. But so if he's going to do it 2 years in a row, it's going to be last year and this year. Stafford's going to feed him so many targets, it's not even going to be funny.
With that being said, I'm going to be drafting him in drafts. Like, I'm not saying I'm out. Just worst case.
I got to say though, man, I think the ECR has Kupp at like the number 3 overall. And I'm just like, man, if I'm number 3, I'm not picking Kupp. I don't feel good about Kupp there.
Nope.
If I'm picking later on and Kupp's there, fine. But number 3, I can't do it, man. I just can't do it.
How late are we picking up Kupp in a redraft league?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying, man. Like the
He's
way
going
he's
first
ranked
round this year.
Yeah, the
Late first round?
ADP at his ADP, I'm not in. I'm just not in.
He's picked in drafts. I'm saying he's picked no later than like pick 9.
Right. Yeah, it's just going to be tough to live up to picking him that high. So I think because of like we say, I mean, it's tough to repeat a season like that. So we just have to see what is the drop off. We would, the smart money would be on a drop off. What is the drop off though? How far is it? Is it still good enough to be high up there? And I'm just kind of betting against it because it's just too much for me, too rich for me. I'll mention one more thing about his lineup here. I see Mike Gesicki as his starting tight end, and that concerns me a little bit when I look down through his depth chart. And the next guy I like the best for him is probably Evan Ingram, who I'm kind of thinking is a good sleeper tight end this year. I'd kind of bet on him, in his new location, but Gesicki, being franchise, you got Tyreek coming in there, you got Waddle, who just set the rookie record for receptions. And this is not the regime that drafted Gesicki. I'm out on Gesicki. I'm thinking that could be a worst case for him, is that his tight end position is a little bit shaky.
Well, come on down to the Prince's. You got him tight end.
I knew it was coming.
Every time we mention tight end.
You got to sell yourself.
Oh, God, sorry. What's funny is I think I tried to trade for Ingram. I think he's brought this up before, and we ended up settling on Njoku. And I think I like Njoku's situation this year now better than Ingram. One thing I'll say about the Ingram hype, by the way, I'm out on. He dropped a pass. It was reported today, so done.
Throw that pot.
Yeah, but I think one thing nobody's mentioning is Dan Arnold is still with that team and showed a lot of chemistry last year with Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
they have
Out
a
of
similar
necessity,
role.
not really.
But no, well, you say out of necessity, but they traded for him. So, I mean, obviously, like something now, obviously different coaching staff, but there was some chemistry there. It's not like one's a blocking tight end and one's a receiving tight end. So there's at least a question mark even surrounding that, in my opinion. Although I do agree, Ingram's got the talent. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him break out this year again.
Yeah, still, it just like I say, it's when you look at his depth chart there, he doesn't have a lot. He's got Mo Alley Cox. He kind of backed him up. He picked Jelani Woods this year, so that's
Brevin Jordan could do something in Houston, and he's on his taxi. So
true. On his taxi, that's what I say. He's got a couple of guys there, kind of money in the bank, so to speak. But yeah, it's just if Gesicki's his guy, then I think that could be a worst case scenario for sure. All right, guys, we're going to move on to the next roster here. Gosh, I've got to clear out of this.
Do we have to
Give the old man a
it's my
skip this
favorite
second.
one.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my favorite one.
Dalvinized Blue Steel, aka the Pooh Crew. You guys want to talk about him a little bit?
My agent says I have to on the show, so I guess I will say something about it.
Well, let's talk about it. There's got to be some worst case scenarios we can come up for him, right? What do we say? What do we think?
All right, so I think his worst case scenario is that this running back group that he has doesn't live up to what he's expecting it to be. Like, I think Taylor and Cook, I think they're about as close to a lock as you can probably get. But as I have come on this show plenty of times, I am not very large on Barkley. And I think Etienne is still unproven. So if they start falling apart, his depth that he started creating is going to kind of dwindle down. He does have a couple wide receivers that he could put in there, but he's going to have to wait on, I think, Christian Watson to develop in Green Bay, but because I don't think DJ Chark is very good depth. He does have Devontae Johnson and Amon St. Brown, which are both really good depth pieces. But if his running back class, his running back room doesn't live up to what he needs, that could really hinder him going into the bye weeks.
Go ahead, Evan. What do you got to say there?
Oh, I'm so excited. So I'm going to go almost the opposite point here, which kind of makes it more fun. I think you're worried about running backs. I think his worst case scenario is the receivers do not step up. So last year he really got bailed out, but some, we'll say savvy trades, I guess. I'll give him a little bit. I mean, he made some trades, whether they were robberies or not, whatever.
Shout out to Dilly.
Well, I mean, he got Deebo Samuel pretty cheap too. So Deebo ended up hitting last year, but there's some uncertainty now around that. And there's a new quarterback, which also throws a wrench in that. Does he get the first 9 weeks of last season or the last 9 weeks of last season of T. Higgins? Because those are very different players. Right now, his wide receiver 2 on his team and his starting lineup is a wide receiver 2 on his own team, who for the first 9 weeks looked maybe like the wide receiver 3 on his team because he couldn't
Tyler
get
Boyd.
I mean, T. Higgins struggled the first half of last season. Now, I know he's a fantasy darling, and I know a lot of people have him in their top 10 for dynasty receivers, but that at least has to be a concern, in my opinion, right? So then you look at his receiver depth. I mean, he's starting 3 running backs in his flex, so obviously he has some concerns about his receivers already. You got DK, who's going to be in a bad offense this year. You have Deontay Johnson, who's either going to be catching passes from Mitchell Trubisky or Kenny Pickett. And I'm not going to throw any shade at small hands, but what if their favorite target is Pickens or Claypool or Najee and not peppering Deontay Johnson with 130 targets a game? So there's just going to be some changes around it. I think the worst case scenario for him is his receivers do not live up to expectations. But I have another fun one, gentlemen, and I think you're going to like this one. I really do. The worst case scenario for Mr. Ian Steele is that he starts the season not 0-1, not 0-2, not even 0-3, but 0-5.
First of all, I want to just say thank you for bringing this up. I love any scenario where that guy starts 0-5 and loses to me also. So you can continue with your point. It's fantastic.
So week 1, he plays Dilly. And we all know, and there's some uncertainty in week 1. Week 1 is that week where you don't really know how guys are going to hit. You're preparing for it. So he makes a bad start. Dilly's voodoo vortex hits. And Dilly wins week poop. 1. Yeah. And wins week 1. Well, then he's got us in week 2. And I'm not trying to bolster our lineup, but our running backs and receivers should not be hurt, knock on wood, by week 2. So we should be okay by then. And we got a pretty studly lineup early. And then he's got Mike week 3, defending runner-up. And then in weeks 4 and 5, he faces 2 other top 5 teams and Shawn and Mark. He doesn't face another bottom 5 team until week 6 when he gets F and G. If he's first off, if he starts the season 0-5, anything can happen at that point when you start. Even if he starts 0-3 or 0-4, at that point, every week matters and no week's guaranteed.
Yeah.
So he could have just a bomb team that, leads the league in scoring and miss the playoffs if he starts 0-5. And I'm so here for it.
Yes, I'm going to second all of that. If he starts 0-5, I would not care if I was in the who cares ball for 3 consecutive years. If he is in the bottom 4, golly, I would be so happy.
Well,
I think it's a possibility.
Yeah.
I'm the bottom 5 guy. He has to play twice this year. And I was 4th in scoring last year. Pretty much got the same roster as I had last year. And I think I was only 4th by a few points. I was almost 3rd in scoring. I shouldn't be bragging because I still finished 6th in the damn league, but I was a tough luck kid last year. So, moving on. Yeah. You said something about, Cook was a lock. And I tell you, man, Cook's getting up there in age, man. And, I don't know that he's a locked in number 2. He's missed some time. It seems like every year. So, we weren't going to talk about injuries. I'm not going to talk about injuries, but, just going by age and history, I don't know that Cook is, I don't know. I mean, I'm not looking for him in redraft this year at all. He's getting to that point where I'm kind of looking at another option there besides Cook. Yeah, Barkley, I know, Shawn, you have a hate relationship with Saquon.
Yes, I do.
And, look at Montgomery too. Herbert made some noise last year. We got a new coaching staff in there. So Montgomery, is he going to get the volume that he's gotten in the past, or are they going to committee that thing? And maybe it's Montgomery's kind of on the way out in Chicago. So no loyalty to him. And look he's got Kelsey up there at tight end. And he's getting up there in age, and he doesn't have much.
Kelsey.
Yeah, doesn't have much behind him. He's got Troutman and Parham. He's got a few guys on his taxi squad, but I don't know if he's as set at tight end as he was at one time. Counting on Kelsey big time, and Kelsey's 32 or something like that now. So I've been picking on him about his roster's aging out, and that's my biggest thing is and I'll give you, you're talking about the receivers there. You're dead on there, Evan. Higgins, up and down, and I may have the same problem with Chase. It might, is it a Higgins week or is it a Chase week? But I'll bet on Chase getting that 50 points in the Pro Bowl every time. And Higgins number 2, and Samuel, not even, he's practicing on the side right now. Did you see that today? He's working off to the side. He doesn't have his contract. Man, you talking about worst case? I see a whole lot of worst case.
Even if Debo gets paid, right? It's really, I learned this as a Chris Johnson fan. It's really hard to run with heavy pockets. So I'm really curious to see how he plays once he has that contract.
Yeah,
He's gonna play not to get hurt.
he'll probably get it, but I don't know. He had his first full season last year. He got a lot in rushing, and it seems like that's another thing, that regression to the mean is that he's going to be down a little bit this year compared to what he was last year.
Hopefully San Francisco doesn't have the running back woes that they had last year.
We're about to get into that with Mark's team.
But dude, let's go.
Just because I have every San Francisco running back, is that what?
And their lead blocker and Kip.
I'm trying to get TDP, but yeah. Well, anything else on the Poo Crew before we move on? He's got Garoppolo. How do you like that? We could talk a long time about Garoppolo, but he's got Lance, so we don't need to worry about that.
I just want to say this has probably been my most memorable and favorite 8 minutes of the NAO show in my life, just getting to talk negative about Ian's roster and the possible things that could go wrong. So
I heard 0-6. So
0-6.
You know,
oh God.
OFNG.
a boy can dream. A boy can dream. All right, let's move on to the Hoosier Daddies. Hoosier Daddies. You know, I won a championship as Hoosier Daddies. I'm trying to bring some good mojo back. So I'm the Hoosier Daddies this year. So tear me apart, guys. What's my worst case here?
You're up first, Evan.
Kyler playing too many video games, or, you know?
Well, the worst case right now for NAO show is that dementia has set in, and he tells us for a fifth time next week that he once won a championship as the Hoosier Daddies. I think he keeps forgetting what's happening.
I tell you about the time.
I'm kidding.
No.
I have not glanced fully at your lineup yet, but just a quick look through here. You have some safe options, I will say that, but I think your worst case scenario is obviously the San Francisco running situation, right? Does Melvin Gordon still take carries away from Javonte Williams? I really hope not. And then we get into a little bit of looking at tight ends. Kittle obviously is a top 5 dynasty tight end. I'm not going to argue against that, but I don't know really how he did with Lance last year. And he's very up and down. He's a guy you want in your starting lineup, but you just have to be prepared that he may only score 3 points that week.
Yeah.
And some weeks he's going to win you games. The biggest worst case scenario, though, in my opinion, is that some of these guys, these upside plays that you're really hoping for, like Cortland Sutton and Marquise Brown, just do not pan out because you have investment in those guys. So Marquise Brown, obviously you invested. I think there was a first round pick in that trade. I'm going to glance. First round pick. You traded away Thielen. I'm not saying it's a bad trade, but there's investment there. You've invested in Ezekiel Elliott in times past. You've invested in Cortland Sutton, obviously, I still think you got a great deal there, but that's where your biggest investments are. And I think some of your biggest question marks. So for me, it's those guys not panning out. And if they don't pan out, how are you going to replenish that going into next season? Because you don't have 2023 draft capital. One other thing I'll note, Elijah Moore doesn't take a step. If Elijah Moore don't take a step, I think you traded away Godwin for him at the time. Seemed like a really savvy trade. That could hurt. Other than that, though, I actually really like your roster. I'm not just trying to be nice. I think you got some upside pieces.
Sean, before I let you go, Sean, what did I tell you in pre-show about Hollywood Brown? Did I tell you that I traded for him in 2 leagues because I have Kyler, but it felt a little bit dirty because I've never really been in on Hollywood. I wouldn't have traded for him in any other situations, but I had to kind of roll those dice, so, but Sean, please build on what.
I'm just going to second what Evan said, because I was going to talk about Hollywood Brown and Cortland Sutton but there is some golden tinge to this thundercloud. All right.
I'm not going to be as nice with your roster, so I'm just saying.
That's fine. That's fine. Hollywood Brown, he's a veteran, which is a benefit for him going to Arizona, because I strongly think that Arizona cannot develop wide receivers. Throw a dart at half their freaking rookie wide receivers. Tell me one that has really emerged like the other rookie wide receivers.
Well, Rondale Moore hasn't had a second season yet. God.
Rondale Moore is not. All right, he's not going to do crap this year. All right. Hollywood Brown is probably going to get so many targets, it's not even going to be funny, because he's going to be the veteran. He's the new Larry Fitzgerald in that offense.
As soon as he gets off PUP and gets his hamstring healthy.
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody starts on pub. Just look at half of Mick Jammer's team here. They are on the pub. But and I think Jerry Jeudy is going to cut into Cortland Sutton's production a little bit. Yes, I have Jerry Jeudy, but I think it's going to be more of a 1A, 1B type thing in Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. So I don't well, you got him in the third flex spot. So what are you really expecting from him? So who knows?
Mark, what do you think?
Yeah.
What's
is your
biggest like scare this year? Like, what is the thing you were scared could happen or like terrified might happen?
Yeah, you mentioned Kittle, and you got a great point there that he's such a good blocker that sometimes he's just more a part of the running game than he is the passing game. And that really has sucked, because you got to put him in there because he can put up 20 plus without any effort hardly. But then, if that's not the game plan and he's in there blocking, same coaching staff, nothing's changed, just the quarterback has changed. So you're right. I mean, it's I can't sit here and say, yeah, I'm feeling like Kittle's going to have he's going to be a tight end 2 or 3 and win me the league. I can't say that. He could, but he also could be blocking a lot and the guy behind the scenes that's not scoring points. So McLaurin is somebody that I look at where I've been waiting for him and, thinking about Wentz being the guy that's going to finally get him over the finish line. That's kind of tough to think about, I believe in McLaurin for the talent. He's kind of aging out because he came in a little bit later than some guys anyway. And he's aging out for dynasty. And now he's got Wentz as the guy that's got to get him over the finish line. So, that's one. You look at Elliott down here. Was it the meniscus, or is he kind of losing a step, So yeah, there's definitely some question marks there. You look at Mitchell up there. He was great last year. Is he going to be the same this year? Or, did they bring in TDP to be more of a goal line guy that's going to snipe touchdowns and Mitchell, kind of has to share time with him. So definitely a lot of question marks. And I told you, I'm not big on Marquise Brown, but I just had to kind of roll those dice and hope that stack finally works out for me. Cause I tried the Rondale stack last year. It didn't work out too well. So I think it worked out well for one game.
Week 1 was really strong,
which I lost anyway, and then I was like, I got to get this guy on my roster after putting him in my flex for 2-3 more weeks and getting, goose eggs from the guy.
That's just some tough luck.
Yeah. It was I was a tough luck kid for sure. Sutton, man. Yeah. I mean, my draft this year was basically Sutton and Irv Smith, kind of betting on some of these guys instead of picking rookies. I picked some guys that I thought had some upside. So, like I said, the Elijah Moore trade, these guys have to pay off for me. And there's question marks with all of them. So, yeah, I've got guys that, with the potential. I like my roster too, but I also see some holes there. So lots has to come together for me for sure.
Now we get to the team that I think is the biggest enigma in the league.
Yeah, you had some comments in pre-show I'd love to hear those comments again. And I know Shawn would love to hear those comments again.
Shawn, put in your earplugs. So here's the thing about Shawn's roster. You look at his starting lineup, and every one of those guys are desirable trade assets, right? Like Jefferson, Waddle, Judy to some people with half a brain, Smith, Ayuk, like, and all of them have value. Mixon, Akers, but they should, because he's invested a crap ton to get them all. So with that being said, his worst case scenario, to more put it to a smaller sample size, I guess, is his young receivers don't take the next step. And I'm looking specifically at Waddle, Judy, Smith, and Ayuk. These 4 guys that there's a lot invested in. Maybe not Ayuk. You got him on a steal. I'll say that.
I drafted Waddle. All right.
But I mean, that's still a lot of investment. I mean, it's a first
round.
And you also traded away Stephon Diggs to get him, to get that pick, right? Okay. So like, there's a lot of investment here. If Judy, like, everything's set, and I guess that's what's crazy. Everything's set up for Judy to succeed this year. If he doesn't, then he loses almost all of his value. Ayuk, if he becomes the 3rd receiver on that team this year, he loses a lot of his value. If Devontae Smith doesn't take a second step and AJ Brown really does dominate things there, you go from looking at Devontae, like we ended last season, you could have got 2 firsts for Devontae Smith. I don't think you can get 2 firsts for him right now. Actually, I'm pretty sure you can't, unless you're messaging Dilly 100 times and he finally responds okay. Like, I think you have some assets that still have value, but their value is capped at the moment because everybody wants to know what they're going to do. Waddle looked incredible last year, but Hill is an issue. Like, you can't just overlook that. I don't think anybody, like Jefferson, could miss the whole season and he's still going to have value because he's proven it now. But these other guys still need to fully prove it. And the thing is, if they don't pan out and you can't get value back for them, you have a 1st-round pick in 2024. So maybe you can do something then. But those, like, they have to, there is no question they have to hit, because there's no backup plan if they don't. And I'm sorry, a little bit.
All right, Shawn, it's a lot to process. What do you think, buddy?
No. I'm not gonna let you have the last word on this.
So I'm
You gotta
first.
tell me what you think now.
Oh, you want me to go now?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
I need to process what Evan just said to me. And see
building
if
on
friendship
building on that
is
point,
intact.
you know, I'm not so worried about Hill in Miami. I think, you know, Waddle is still going to see a good deal of volume. And if anything, you know, if the defense is focusing on Hill in any given game, then Waddle's just going to tear him up. So I'm really not worried about Waddle. I think he's going to be just fine. Of course, Hill's there, so you can't just discount him. I'll give you that, but I don't think it's going to hurt Waddle so much. Now, the Judy, you said something about, you know, you're talking about my roster with Sutton, and you think Judy's going to take away from him. Yeah, I mean, there's a big question mark there. We have no idea. You got Albert O.
Hot take. I think Tim Patrick's the leading receiver on that team this year.
I mean, yeah, that's the guy that you can't leave out. You can't leave out Patrick, man.
I'm dead serious.
No, I am too, man, because every year no matter what's happened with Sutton or Judy, he's been pretty constant, and he's proven that he can get in the end zone, and he's proven that he can catch any ball you throw his way, pretty much, you know. So you can't sleep on Tim Patrick. So there's 4 really good offensive threats there in Judy, Sutton, Albert O, Tim Patrick, and it's tough to say right now, man. To me, we won't know until we know. You know, I'm sitting there with Patrick and Sutton. I still don't. I'm not betting a whole lot of money on either one because I don't know until I know. Yeah. So, I mean, to say that Judy is going to just definitely be the guy, I think it's a little short-sighted at this point. And now you got Brown in Philadelphia in a team where a lot of people are saying, "Oh yeah, now that they got Brown, man, they're going to pass more." You can't say that. They were a run-first team. They were passing about 25 times a game. It's a narrative to say now Philly's going to be a passing team. Until we know, we don't know. So I kind of agree with him. Now Ayuk I do like a lot. I feel like, and Evan will tell you, we kind of pay attention to Waldman and the what he says about receivers is pretty on. Ayuk was his guy last year, and I still kind of have some belief that can come to fruition. And Debo, Debo is we just talked about Ian's. He's kind of up in the air, so I think Ayuk could be a sleeper for you. But yeah, you've got out of all those receivers, there's definitely some question marks. You've got a lot invested in them. They better come through. Worst case scenario is that they don't.
All right. So
he's been like, hold on, right before you get going, I've just been smiling, looking at Shawn the whole time you're talking. He's like biting his lip, like he's just mulling over this whole thing. So I'm excited. All right.
All right. So yes, when I first started Dynasty, 2 years now? 2 years ago, I tried to go in heavy on running back. We all know how that went. It's well documented in the chat. Everyone knows how well that freaking. All right. So I changed my point of view and I went from running back to wide receiver, and I went to go get a bunch of wide receivers that I can depend on for years to come. If I'm going to spend draft capital on guys with upside, and that's what you all are talking about is the upside of these guys. It isn't established yet. So, yeah, you guys are both right. I need these year 2, year 3 wide receivers to come through and be like top end wide receiver 2s, if not wide receiver 1s, for this to work out how I will. But if it does happen, if it does work out that way, y'all are. So let's hope for that. The only big one that I have is actually Cam Akers, because I think he came back too early last year, and it kind of gave me I was like, hey, he's coming back. He looks okay, but he doesn't have the speed. Hopefully, with a off season and a training camp and what have you, he gets back to what he was before the injury. He's my biggest question mark personally.
No, I mean, I'll agree with that. I think Cam Akers coming back is a big piece, though, and you finally get to see that trade to fruition, right? You finally get to find out what's going to happen there. I mean, we'll say this, right? I look at your roster, and I'm there with you. If it hits, you're going to be a force because you're going to have these guys. If 2 of those 4 receivers I talked about hit, really you just need 2 of the 4 to hit, right. And you're going to be really solid moving forward because you got receiver typically should be a position you have for at least 5 years, right? It's a question mark. I was massively high on Akers. I know Mark was coming out of the draft process, so I hope he can do something for you this year. The only reason I've been off Akers this year is I really think the Rams are going to move to a committee approach. And so I think Akers could be great, but in spurts, because I think last year they went committee, it worked. And I think that's what they're going to lean on again this year.
I'll disagree just a little bit on the Akers thing, because once he came back in, if you look at the usage. Yeah,
that's fair.
He definitely was their top guy. He came back in even off of the injury, probably too early, like you said, Shawn, but they still gave him the work. They gave him the bulk of the work. So if they, same coaching staff, everything's the same there. If they continue with that, then I think things are looking up for Akers. So it would matter more how much more is he healed and ready to go 100%. You look at their line was pretty terrible. We saw that in the Super Bowl, and nobody ran really well. Sony's gone. Henderson is just looking more like a receiving back. I mean, he can spell him a little bit, but they're using him as a receiver a lot. So I kind of feel like with the present company there, that Akers is going to be, he could be the workhorse. If he's healed fully and gets out there and shows anything like he was before the injury, I think he can be okay. So I'll give you some props on him. I'll talk bad about your receivers, but I'll give you some props on Akers. He could be the workhorse guy there, you know.
Henderson was an RB1 for the first like 9 weeks or 10 weeks of the season. So I'll disagree with you slightly. I think they can split with him. And I think the drafting of Kyron Williams, who was projected as one of the best receiving backs in the draft before he just had a terrible combine, I think that said something. Now, obviously, Kyron's been beat up, but if they drafted him with the idea of, okay, this can be a third down guy for us, we can split carries between Akers and Henderson, maybe that plan doesn't work, but I think that is in the back of their head.
Yeah, Henderson definitely has had good numbers when he's gotten the work, but he's also,
but he can't stay healthy.
No, right. And so I think that's the big knock on him is that, if they're going to split it,
so can you keep him healthy if you give him 8 carries a game? Yeah.
I mean, he'd look good as a receiver, man. You see some of those wheel routes he was running, man. Some of those catches he had in the Super Bowl, man. I'm like, wow. And I got him as a backup, here and there, and I like it because he could definitely. If Akers can't go, then he's a good one. But I feel like Akers is going to get the bulk, but we'll have to see. They could split it up a little more, based on both of them having the injuries now. So. All right, we want to move on to our last roster here. That is going to be FNG, our buddy FNG. So let's talk about worst case scenarios for FNG.
So I don't think there is a worst case scenario because he's like kind of getting to the point where his rebuild is starting to be established. But for this season coming up, worst case scenario for FNG is that his team starts really slow, and that puts him behind the 8 ball going into the later half of the season. He's depending a lot on some really good, potentially really good rookies. And I mean, Godwin, he might be on the PUP list going into the season. We'll see what happens with him. If not, he might even be a kind of a distraction while Mike Evans and everybody else gets the ball, what have you. And Amari Cooper, if you are okay with who's going to be throwing the football to Amari Cooper, I think you're a laughing stock of this league. But Deshaun Watson, he's probably not going to be there first half of this season. He's going to be there probably next to the second half of the season, if not gone the whole season. So I think the biggest thing with his lineup right now as it sits is that it's just going to take some time for it to start hitting the ground, getting some traction, and that sort of thing.
I'll let you go in a second here, Evan, but did you not see that Cleveland signed Josh Rosen? I mean, you're saying that
Josh Rosen is
you're saying he's going to be you're saying anybody believing in Cooper is going to be the laughing stock. They just signed Josh Rosen, man. So, I mean, I kind of take issue with that statement, but Evan, you tell me what you
okay.
So first things first, I want to give credit where credit is due. When I look at this roster, top to bottom, including draft picks, if I was able to take over any roster in the league, this might be it, because I think it would be the funnest roster to go with. I mean, there's so many directions this roster can go with, whether you're trading current starters or trading future draft capital. Like, there's just a lot of different ways to go. So I'm going to have to make this very manager specific and team specific with my worst case scenario. And hear me out. Worst case scenario is that his rookies, the first round rookies, Drake London, Traylon Burks, and Kenneth Walker, don't hit this season. And here's why. Here's why I think that's the worst case scenario. We've all, as dynasty managers, gotten to our own heads. And when I look at his draft capital for next season, he's got 323 first and a 23 second, 123 third, a bunch of fourths, a couple fifths. Like, he's got a bunch of draft capital. If those guys don't pan out and he gets into his own head on his drafting, scouting, or whatever you want to call it, I think that's the worst case scenario, because I think the strategy he should have is continue to draft rookies. But I think if those guys don't pan out, he could get into his own head where it's like, I'm just going to trade for sure things. And then he trades too early for win now pieces. I think that's kind of where I would go with his team. Because look, at the end of the day, he's playing with house money with a lot of these players, right? Hunter Renfrow, especially, was a guy that didn't have much value last year and has turned into a lot of value. Cooper, I don't know what idiot traded him away for just 1 second in Cephas, but I'm kidding. Sorry.
You're not.
Anyways, I'm just saying, like, he's got some. Cooper's regardless of who's going to be throwing on the football, he's the wide receiver 1 on his team now because of that trade. So volume is a thing. Now his tight end position's a little wonky, and we look at some of that. So again, I think that's the worst case scenario, because I think he's doing a good job. And one thing that could make him second guess himself would be those draft picks just not panning out.
Well, he's got Penny, and so if Walker doesn't pan out, then Penny's good. It's probably because Penny's doing well, right?
Or
So
nobody does, because that offense is terrible.
Well, that's the other thing.
Dallas.
Yeah, that's random thoughts from a random mind. So
The way you said that, yeah,
TJ Dallas.
It made me think of. Have y'all seen the movie Accepted? Sorry, I'm going to get off base.
Yeah.
It made me think of where that guy comes in and goes, Battle Royale. Just out of nowhere. Sorry. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So he's got Penny, but maybe he's got 2 good running backs on a bad team. It's going to be, yeah. And Shawn and I were talking, a little bit pre-show about Garoppolo and why doesn't Seahawks go out and get Jimmy, especially, in the division. He's got to be better than what they got, right? So it could be it could be just a mess there, and maybe he's got good guys on a bad offense, and it doesn't make much difference. I think, I mean, he's got Godwin in his starting lineup, and I really feel like he's not on the pup. He's not starting off on the pup, but he probably should be. I think, history says that guys coming off an ACL, it's going to be a down year for him, and he may not be relevant until end of the year. And I hate it. When I traded him, Godwin hadn't torn his ACL, and it could have been something really good for him. And now he's got to he's faced with a guy that's getting up there in age that has to maybe overcome that ACL and have a down year. But you mentioned Renfro, another guy that I think is going to regress because of Adams being there. If Waller's healthy, then I think Renfro was, a thing last year because Waller was hurt. And so if those 2 guys are healthy, he's probably number 3 on that team, and maybe a little bit boomer bust. So yeah, I look at his bench and I see guys like Penny there. Maybe he's the guy. Ramondre Stevenson, maybe he makes the jump this year. Drake London. He may have guys on the bench that turn out to be guys that he's got in his starting lineup before it's all said and done. So, worst case scenario for me is that some of these guys in his starting lineup don't do well, and maybe the guys don't come behind him as well. So he may be counting on guys that are on his bench to be the guys. And does that happen or not? I agree with you, Evan, that it's a fun roster to look at. He's got a lot of good young talent on there and a lot of good draft capital. So he's sitting pretty as far as the future is concerned. Maybe this year is not the year. That's the worst case for me.
One of my favorite things about his roster, just to hit on this, is I don't think that there is a wasted roster spot. I think he's got dart throws everywhere. And from seeing how he traded last year, now, maybe I'm giving him way too much credit. but it seemed like he strategically grabbed veteran guys that could have gained value. They did, and he traded them. And when I look at his roster, I see that same thing. NVS, AJ Green, because there's injuries on that offense right now, right? Marvin Jones, there's been talks about him getting traded to a contender. So there's so many, there's not a wasted roster spot on his roster is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Shawn?
Well, I think I would totally agree. I like his roster. That's why I selected him for the Pro Bowl, and he's going to be a backbone to our Pro Bowl team for years to come, and we're always going to be winning that trophy. So we went over 5 teams. We figured out that I have a really good upside team that everyone absolutely loves and has nothing bad to say about, and that other guy is going to be 0-6 starting the season. So if you know, you know. Ian, you suck.